everybody. Awesome pleasure to have Robert Dunne from Movember New Zealand on board. This podcast is basically about men and taking responsibility for your health and well-being and your future. So it's Movember. I've got the mo on, and I'm sure Robert does too. And before we get started, Robert, what did you do on the weekend, mate?
Mate, what did I do on the weekend? I had a Movember golf tournament on the Saturday up in Waipu, which was pretty special actually. Like a beautiful part of the country, and the whole idea around the golf tournaments is to try and give a couple of your mates a ring, put a team in together, and go off somewhere and spend 4 or 5 hours together, and hopefully have a huge amount of fun, and also engage in your health as well. So that went fantastically well, and then I flipped the coin to the other side, and we had the local school's biggest fundraiser, which is called Mower Day, which was so I went down there with my 3 kids, and my wife was working on one of the market stalls, and was a dad for the day. So bit of both on the weekend, but a good weekend.
Wicked. And so we often talk about balance there, and what do you think, especially from a male perspective, what's really good about having that time away with blokes to talk about blokey things, and then hopefully test the boundaries a little bit with each other in order to come back and be fully present for your family and your wife?
Yeah, I think so, mate. Like there's, the reality is, blokes probably engage in their health in a little bit of a different way, and quite often it's a bit more informal, and it's a bit more shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face like females do it. So, the reality is you're going to spend, 4 or 5 hours on the golf course with your mates, and maybe the first hour or 2 might be about everything but your health or how you're going or your well-being. But normally what happens after you've talked about, golf or moustaches or the rugby is that you do, sort of that guard drops down, and you will talk about what's going on in life, some of the more significant things. And it's those first conversations which are pretty significant, and the more platforms we can provide for men to have those conversations is really, really important. And I think you're right. Having a bit of time with the boys, I think makes you, come back and probably better off for when you're spending your time with your family, because balance is, is genuinely really important.
I was saying, obviously you've been exposed to this for a number of years now. Having an event with the premise that this is kind of about men's health, do you find that the conversation turns around to that quicker, or it's something that still you get the old guys putting up a few barriers before things come out?
Look, I think so. I think in general we're turning to men's health conversations quicker. Like whether that's certainly during the month of November, whether that be the moustache kind of being that casual first conversation, and it's sort of fun as a Trojan horse. Those first conversations are about the moustache or sport or golf or everything. But I think we are turning pretty quickly to those more significant conversations about our health and well-being. And I actually think, there's still a huge amount of work to do, but I'm actually seeing some real maturity amongst the sort of general population. I think, it comes at different stages. Some of the older guys are more susceptible to some of the things we support. And so there's a bit more urgency there, but I think they definitely are talking and sharing their experiences with their mates, more so than they have in the past. And then, for the younger men, I think the message we're pushing really hard is obviously, mental health is very topical at the moment amongst our younger men. And we're seeing some real maturity around acknowledging that that's an issue and wanting to do something about it. But also, a big message we push at Movember is it's, behavioural change. The sooner we can get that front and centre of young men, the better off we're going to be. And it's what you do now that gives you miles on the clock and is going to let you live a really good life. So if we can get some good habits amongst our young men, I've no doubt that that's just going to set them up really well for later on, for when they're, a father or a husband or a business owner or whatever it may be. And that just means they're going to be better off in the long run. So it's twofold a little bit, but I'm massively encouraged by some of the behaviours I'm seeing from men in general in New Zealand. Work to do, as I said, but there's some really positive signs.
Nice, and I think you just call that synergy right there, that statement, those little habits that you can do now that make your life brilliant. So then, who is Robert Dunne today?
Mate, I think I'd probably fit really nicely into that jack of all trades, master of nothing. But a father, twin boys and a little girl, a husband. We live in the Bay of Plenty. Really lucky where we live. We're sort of just out of the big smoke with a bit of space for the kids to hoon around, but we're close enough to the beach and in town. And I've been working for Movember now for 8 years, a pretty stereotypical New Zealand male. Really went to a big boys state school down in Christchurch and played, rugby and cricket and tennis and golf and anything I could turn my hand to, and sort of lived for the weekend a little bit and to hang out with my mates and play a bit of sport and socialise. And then, like a lot of people, flew the coop and did 7 or 8 years overseas on my OE after university at Lincoln. And it was actually over there that I was first exposed to Movember. And, Movember was starting to get really busy back here in New Zealand. And that was kind of where the connection was. And when I came home, they got in touch again and said, look, we need to get some more localisation to the Movember campaign. And that sort of fast forwarded me to where I am today. And it's, I look after, it's a fancy title, Movember New Zealand Country Manager, but it's only me and one other person, so it's it's not that fandangled. But so thus I'm kind of look after all aspects of Movember, but it's something I love doing. And you find your motivations in different places every year, or as you get old. When it was young, it was about sort of mobilising my mates and growing moustaches and having a huge amount of fun and almost maybe trying to help the older generation, looking at it that way. But now, I'm very much, focused on holistically, just helping men in New Zealand in general, whether they be 15 years old or whether they be, 75 years old. And the reality is, some of the messaging I think is important to all of those demographics. So it's a cool job, mate. And, I get a bit of moustache fatigue in December, get a bit sick of moustaches by then. But at the end of Movember, you've raised a decent amount of money in it, and it allows you to fund programs locally, which is sort of pushes your buttons and makes you go again. So it's a good gig. I really enjoy it.
Huge. And last year that you guys managed to get 1.8 million together. Where does all that go?
Yeah, mate, we're really fortunate. Kiwis are just beyond supportive, which is awesome. And all the funds raised in New Zealand stay in New Zealand, and we're out. While the campaign's probably a more general men's health campaign, with the funds raised, it's prostate cancer, testicular cancer, male mental health with a focus on suicide prevention. So that's our area of focus for the programs that we fund, and we've been lucky enough to put 40 programs together locally, and we've got 4 or 5 live at the moment. Just put together a partnership with the New Zealand Rugby Union around mental health and wellbeing for the wider rugby community, which is exciting because I think we come to the party with some expertise and knowledge around how to talk to men. They come to the party with a bit of that as well, but also a really large community of men throughout the country that they talk to regularly. So I think you put the two together and you're in a good spot. And both parties are really passionate about helping, men in New Zealand. So, that's an example of the work that we do. And I think a good reason to support us as well.
Absolutely. And I think something that's extra special about the All Blacks these days is that you hear the term bandied about that good men make good All Blacks, and I suppose it's another thing for you guys to have good men setting the example for the rest of us out there. Another thing you guys are working with is Farm Strong, and like you said, you're from Christchurch, which, with the exception of Auckland and Wellington, most cities in New Zealand are large service towns. And you said you studied at Lincoln. What do you think is really important about that farming community? You hear some pretty shocking stats when it comes to suicide in that isolated rural environment.
Oh, totally, mate. And that was, that was one of the reasons that we funded Farm Strong, is because mental health and suicide prevention in rural areas is a real issue. And also, you did right. Most Kiwis, whether they know it or not, are connected to the rural sector or rural communities or agriculture in some way, shape or form. I'm off the farm myself, and a lot of my my family, my wife's family, are still farmers today. So really connected to that community. And the reality is, it's they're a pretty isolated crew. Like, not as many people work on farms as there used to be due to mechanisation, and there's probably a lot more debt on a lot of these properties, and a lot of pressures that some of these guys are pretty young and running pretty substantial businesses with a lot of stress and debt on them, and a lot of the things that they have to deal with are intangible. They can't control the weather, and they can't control whether someone overseas is going to buy their product. So there's a lot of stuff in there that can create a little bit of adversity for these guys. So it made a lot of sense to fund a program in the rural areas, and also because they're so supportive of Movember as well. They go great moustaches, and they're really generous with their donations to Movember as well. So it made a lot of sense to do that. But you're right, such a sort of almost that was the stereotypical New Zealand male is seen as staunch and stoic and doesn't say too much and takes all the problems of everyone else on their shoulders, and that's probably no more seen than in the rural community. And we're just trying to shift that around a little bit and let guys know that sometimes you can't just work your way out of problems, and you are allowed to get off the farm every now and again. Sometimes guys can go whole weeks without even going out their farm gate. They might have only talked to one person all week. So we just, same thing, we need to drive some better behaviours with those guys to sort of help them, give them some tools in the toolbox for when maybe they are going through a bit of adversity, they know how to self-manage, because their access to services is significantly lower, or even to communities and people to talk to can be a lot lower than, say, the general population in the sort of growing metropolitan areas.
Absolutely. A friend of mine was on a video that was produced by Doug Avery, who's written the book Resilient Farmer, and another friend's father in the Waikato wrote some good stuff for Farm Strong. What sort of resources can anybody in the farming community get out of something like Farm Strong?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that Farm Strong does to try and help the rural community, or give them the tools to get through any times of adversity, or even give them the tools that they're never really at a point of crisis or adversity. So the majority of that is housed on Farm Strong, on the Farm Strong website, and it's very much an upstream strategy around it. It's really simplest in encouraging farmers to get off site, to be a little bit more physically active, because you actually, even though so often the perception is that farmers are out, lifting bales of hay and putting sheep on the back of a truck and all that sort of stuff. The reality is, they use machines a lot more than they ever used to. So they might sit on their butt working hard, but on a machine, on a tractor or in a truck or whatever. And so they actually need to be more physically active. They need to eat well. They eat on the go a lot. And it's, eating well, it just makes such a difference to your health and well-being. They need to sleep better. And they need to be more socially connected. And that's a really big one, is around, engaging with the people that are around you. Because, back in the old days, for better or worse, before drunk driving, when, rural rugby clubs and sports clubs were a lot bigger, and when some of these rural towns were a lot bigger, you're a lot more socially connected than you are today. So there's a lot of messaging and strategies around, encouraging farmers and helping farmers to try and do some of those things and acknowledge some of the triggers in their lives. Then when they are feeling a bit stressed, why is that? And trying to help them to get something, to acknowledge it and do something about it, so it never becomes something of real significance.
That's really wicked. So taking ourselves back a step, you said just all the money raised in New Zealand stays in New Zealand. Movember as a sort of a global entity, what's the real focus with that? There's the global action plan and things like True North, health, things like that. What's the major goal around Movember? You said a little bit about maturing the conversation.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, at a really, top line mission statement, we want to change the face of men's health. And that really that does drive all the things we do. But we have a few, core strategies underneath that drive what we fund and what we're trying to tell men. And the reality is a lot of the problems that we're talking about now, and we're talking about in New Zealand context, are quite similar in a lot of different places around the world. Whether it be Australia, whether it be Canada, whether it be the States. Obviously, in other parts of the world it's different, but in the places that we exist, there is a lot of similarities, and we see a lot of benefit in collaboration. So sharing information to stop duplication. You'd be surprised, or you may not be, how much duplication goes on around the world. So people effectively trying to do the same pieces of work and not knowing that it's been done somewhere else. And what we've been able to do as a global organisation is, we would never undertake a piece of work in Movember New Zealand or Movember Australia without looking what's happened in the other countries around the world, seeing if there was something similar. And if there was, connecting our network and ensuring that, we're accelerating outcomes by collaboration. And quite often, a piece of work may have already been done, and we can take all those learnings and put it into what we do here. So we genuinely think that collaboration is a really powerful tool when used properly. So that is something we're really focused on connecting our Movember network, and we've seen real gains from that. We invested a lot in survivorship, because the reality is people do go through, on the cancer side of things, they do go through cancer treatment, and quite often when they're done and dusted, they get spat out the other side. But, there's still side effects to some of these things. It's, you're probably all of a sudden, who you were as a man has changed significantly, and what you can do now has changed significantly. And we need to support men around, what the new normal is for them and what life looks like for them for the future. So we do a lot of initiatives around that. And as I said, on the mental health side of things, it's very much about an upstream technique, and how can we give men tools to self-manage and change their own behaviours. Because while the people on the front lines do some fantastic work, like it's amazing what they do, really, to be honest, whether it's on the helplines or the social workers or the nurses or the people who see people at a real point of crisis. The reality is that to make a true difference, like significant improvement in the state of men's health, we need to get further up the chain so that people can address things a lot earlier, so that they never become as significant as they do later on. And I think some of those things are simple, and some of those things are more complicated. But we've got to take things on at work, in our community, at our sports clubs, everywhere, to truly make a difference, not just within the health providers.
For sure, and that's basically why I started this podcast. It's pretty easy sitting in a chair and dealing with one person at a time as an optometrist and having a small conversation, but to be able to share the words of many people, like you say, doing good work in an isolated bubble, and share that is really good. And that's something I saw on your website, that you're translating that accumulated knowledge and all these people working together to get to outcomes faster, to then get that out to a bigger platform. What's that sort of look like to be able to translate knowledge into action?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's all, KT, knowledge translation is a massive part of our strategy, and that's within the programs that we fund. And the reality is, when you look at something on a piece of paper, or you read a lit review or something on that's been funded, whether it's ours or someone else's, sometimes that can be quite difficult to decipher, what that means. So truly being able to translate the knowledge of a successful program, or for that matter, an unsuccessful program, because what doesn't work is just as important as what does work, amongst our community, whether they're people we're funding already, or whether it's people we're about to fund, is really, really important. Because, as you know, in life, we can say the same thing 10 different ways, and how someone says something in the States and how they talk about a person or a setting or a region or a behaviour can be hugely different to the naked eye, but actually it effectively means the same thing, and we could be adapt or learn from it here in New Zealand or Australia, but it's being that conduit and that gap between those territories to make sure that collaboration is really smooth. And it's some of the stuff may sound quite simple, but I think the reality is it's just not done as much as it should be. So we're really trying to sort of pick up the ball on that and fill a lot of gaps that we think exist within some of the funding that we've seen. So it's a really important part of it, and there's we've been able to get some really clever people to help us do that.
Wonderful. Just circling back here a moment, you said you were over on your OE and then you came back to New Zealand because the guys at Movember wanted a bit of a hand. What was your sort of connection with the guys in Australia and growing New Zealand the second to jump on board?
Yeah, mate. No, there's like a lot of things in life. It's a funny how it all evolved. But I was just a typical young Kiwi guy over in the UK doing my OE. Circling around the Redback and the Walkabout and going to rugby games and with hundreds of other Kiwis doing the same things. And a friend of mine who was an English guy who I was playing rugby with at the time actually knew the guys who started Movember from Australia, from Melbourne. And I actually didn't know much of it because I'd been overseas and I'd sort of heard of it, but it was in Aussie and it was in New Zealand. It wasn't in the UK yet. And they decided to bring it to the UK because there was a bit of sort of grassroots participation and a bit of organic growth there. So they came over and we literally just rolled up our sleeves and helped them out, voluntarily, just did events, sort of tried to mobilise the expatriate community in London and also get some of the POMs going as well. And it went fantastically well. And it was the early years of Movember are so exactly that. So grassroots and organic and just everyone doing 1,000 jobs, job title being phenomenally broad, just get stuff done. And that was kind of my first, involvement with it. And then, as I said before, it started to grow quite significantly in New Zealand. And then when I got home, I'd been home for a little bit and one of those Australian boys who started Movember got in touch and said, look, it's really growing in New Zealand. We need some localization. What would you think about getting involved? And that was kind of where it all started for me, working formally for Movember here in New Zealand. We just had the earthquakes in Christchurch, unfortunately. From pretty much from that point on in time, I've been looking after Movember New Zealand. So that's scary actually to think the amount of time has gone past. But in saying that, I look back now and I still really enjoy my job today and there's been some good times along the way.
And so how did Movember sort of become this sort of group of mates that developed into a movement to now this global vision? What do you think really made it successful?
Yeah, mate. Well, God, in its essence, if you go all the way back, it was just a group of guys in a pub in Fitzroy, Melbourne, talking about things that had gone out of fashion. And 15 years ago, the moustache was absolutely one of those. There just weren't too many around. People were going to work clean shaven. It was kind of that time in life. It's not like it is today. And they just literally, to be hard case Australians, just decided to grow moustaches for one of the boys' birthdays the next month. It happened to be in November. It wasn't for a cause. It wasn't for anything in particular. But kind of the one thing that they sort of realised at the end of the month was that it was a phenomenal conversation starter. They probably tell stories about, their girlfriends saying they're going to cut them if they didn't shave it off, or the boss saying, you can't come to work looking like that. But just basically every day, everywhere they went, people said, why are you doing that? And at the time they didn't know. So the next year they did decide to do it as a fundraiser. Went to the Prostate Cancer Foundation Australia because they did a bit of research and saw that prostate cancer was a bigger threat to a female as breast cancer was to a female. And they and back then, 15 years ago, there was really nothing formalized for men. There was a lot of initiatives for females and for children and for things overseas, but there really was nothing for men. So they went to the Prostate Cancer Foundation and said, we'd like to do this as a fundraiser and we'd love to give the funds to you guys. And they actually in their wisdom said, thanks, but no thanks. You guys are a bit weird and, moustache, I'm not really sure if moustache growing's the way forward. But they just did it anyway and raised 50 grand and went back to the end of the month and said, we'd still like to give the money to you. And sure enough, they were like, oh, actually you guys are onto something. And yeah, let's work together. And that's basically the origins of Movember. And if you fast forward to today, it's, a global organization, than exists in over 21 countries around the world. But I think the reason it's been successful is that, it is a large organisation these days doing a number of things, but at the heart of it, it's still non-traditional, it's still fun. The first conversations are, non-specific to health, but it's a way of breaking down the barriers and kind of that fun as a Trojan horse strategy. And I still think that's at the core of what we do. But I think what's happened over the years is, as we've matured our organisation around what we say and what we fund, and as we've grown, I think the general population has grown and matured with us, and we're now at a time where, we're more happy to acknowledge some of these things are an issue, and there's a lot of people saying, look, we want to do something about it. So we've been able to channel that energy, and help men change behaviour, help fund initiatives that are going to do that on a large scale. So, but I still think at its core, Movember is, almost the same campaign as it was 15 years ago, which I think which makes it awesome. It's still got that, it's still all about the moustache, really.
No, it truly is awesome. Yeah, we live in an age now as well in which Movember's developed through, and that our ability to connect, for example, you and I just through the internet being able to have a conversation. We've got people like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss, and we're talking off air, like what motivated me to start this, those two guys. Other people like Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink. We've had the guys from Everyman in the States on here, and it's all about taking responsibility for who you are. And I was listening to a interview that you'd done, and one of the key things that you wanted to get across is guys understanding their family history. And it's one of my questions that I ask my patients is, what's your family history? And you touched on in that interview that you had some cancer in your family. What do you think that's really important from your perspective?
Well, I think you did right. I think the way that we're truly going to make change is to encourage men to look after themselves, or to empower men, or whatever it may be. We've got to start taking a lot more responsibility for ourselves, because it is ingrained in females at an early age to look after themselves, and I think it's almost the complete opposite for young men. Certainly when I was young, so that's what we're fighting against. But I see myself as almost sometimes, or certainly previously, the target market for Movember, in the sense that I literally did not know until I started working for Movember what my grandparents died of. And both my grandparents died really, really young. My grandfather, who was, my idol, my mentor, and someone I respected greatly, died of skin cancer literally in 2 or 3 weeks from time of diagnosis to death. And he died in his 50s. And at the time I was 19 or 20, and I didn't really realise how young he had died, and how much life he still had to live. He didn't go to my 21st. He didn't see me do some of the more significant things in my life, like get married and have children and all that stuff that I want to do when I get older. And it is because he was too staunch. He didn't, he looked after everyone else and not himself. And in the end, that was the end of him, unfortunately. And so, even though it seems a really simple thing, and we all should know it, I would challenge. I bet you could get 20 guys in a room, age 30 tomorrow, and you'll find a significant number of those do not know their family history. They do not know what their grandfathers passed away of, or tragically, even if their father had passed away. They don't truly understand, fitness and health literacy around what is good for us and what's bad for us. And they don't truly understand the importance of being socially connected. And so I think, we can arm men with these things. Like, these aren't, you don't have to go buy these things at the shop, or you don't have to do a degree to know this stuff, So these are some potentially simple things that we can give men to help themselves. And I think if we can do that on a really big scale, we'll move forward. Like, we will be we will help a lot of people, I think.
No, that's beautiful. And you've just reminded me another reason why I did this. And it's exactly the same story. I lost one of my grandfathers to type 2 diabetes, and it was the same thing. He didn't have an understanding of what it meant. And carried on looking after us and looking after other people, but didn't look after himself. And it was one of those things that was a quick demise. And unfortunately, like you said, missed out on my 21st, missed out on meeting my daughter and my brother's daughter, and seeing all us boys do great things, and as well as my cousins. And yeah, it's the same thing. It's those little things that you can be doing today to prevent that being your story later in life, and hopefully being there for the rest of the people that are significant in your life. And I think that's why Movember is so resonating, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, mate. I think, the issues are significant, but I think you can if you break it down into some of these simple, smaller things or simpler actions that we're talking about, you can have a real go at knocking it on the head and helping men in general be more healthy. And I think the point you made as well, around me being able to talk to you and have the discussion, like some of the social, digital, online world gets a lot of criticism, but it's a massive tool, a positive tool as well. It can be, if used properly. We can get the word out far and wide. We can showcase what good behaviour is like. We can redefine what masculinity is like. Like New Zealand Rugby and the All Blacks, I think, are doing in a really positive way. And you can connect with more people that way. So I think while sometimes some of these things get a bad rap, it actually is a tool for good if we are mature with it and use it properly.
For sure. Now I just got a notification come through my phone, and it was saying that we're past the halfway point of Movember, the point of Mo return, it says. So what's in store for the latter part of the month?
Yeah, mate. Well, hopefully, because it's almost a little bit ironic that come on November the 1st, we're a moustache charity, but we encourage people to be clean shaven. So hopefully, now that we're well and truly past the halfway mark, there's some glorious moustaches starting to surface, and that's those are hopefully that conversation starter, that our main marketing tool, and hopefully, the main thing is, hopefully people are having conversations, and not just about the moustache, but they're starting to pivot to, men's health conversations, whether it be family history, whether it be checking in with your mates, catching up with someone you haven't seen for a wee while, putting something into practice, like being more physically active, or, eating a little bit better, or going for an annual checkup, or finding out your family history. Like, hopefully that's the stuff that's happening. And what we say a lot as well is, Movember's 30 days of the year, but men's health's, 365 every day of the year. So once we get through Movember, those things carry on. But we're also really fortunate to raise a lot of money, and over the next couple of weeks is when, the majority of that comes in, as people sort of call on their pledges, because their moustaches and that are showing now. And while I think we've talked about some really positive stuff, the reality is the issues are still real. There still is work to do. So, one thing I truly believe is that Movember is a good place to donate to put your money to, because we've got some runs on the board. We've been trying to help men for a long time, and we just continue to get better and better at it. So, any money, any funds raised that do come our way allows us to try and do that on the largest scale possible. So, we appreciate everyone's support, and I think we've raised close to $800,000 already, and we could even be a larger campaign than last year, which I think just shows the generosity of Kiwis and their willingness to support each other, which is, it's awesome to see.
Absolutely. And what's the value of having some real good ambassadors for Movember? You got a real stalwart in Jay Reeve, always out there with the Mo, even if it's on the red carpet, and people like Art Green going over to run the New York Marathon, and a few of the All Blacks boys sporting the Mo's. What's it like having real quality ambassadors?
Oh, mate, it's invaluable. Like, the reality is, as I said, Movember's an online peer-to-peer fundraising campaign, and while externally it might look really large, behind the scenes it's just two of us, working hard, trying to get out there as much as possible. And the value of good partners and good ambassadors, you can't, speak highly enough of the value they add to Movember. Jay's a phenomenal ambassador who he not only gives us his time and his moustache and his voice, but he also is fully engaged and as effectively is like having another person on the payroll, because he's done it for so long, and he knows what we're trying to achieve, and is forever out there when I'm not with him, just continually to spread the word. Art's such a big believer in the benefit of physical activity on your mental health and well-being, and he just lives that every day. And again, just so supportive, and always takes on big undertakings for us, whether it's trying to burpee his way to the top of Mount Everest or run the New York Marathon. He'd never run a marathon before, but took it on for us. So yeah, and then I can't speak highly enough actually of New Zealand rugby in terms of it really is All Blacks are probably seen as the sort of most masculine, stereotypical New Zealand males, but they are very engaged in putting out positive messages to the wider community and using their pretty substantial platform as a way to do that. And I remember I was listening to the radio the other day, and it made me think how far we've come when Richie Mwanga was talking about he's rooming with Bowden Barrett, and Barrett's trying to help him learn the calls, and they're trying to figure out how to get him sort of bedded into the All Blacks. Well, 15, 20 years ago, two All Blacks competing for a jersey, they'd barely look at each other, because that was the sort of mentality back then. But now it's all, it's all for the jersey, it's all for the greater good. And I think that flows through to a lot of the other stuff they're doing. So to work with people like that, like Jay and like Art and New Zealand Rugby, just allows us to amplify our messaging. And I think just help more people in general, I think, and normalise the issues and what we're trying to say.
Yeah, I love it. And it's always good to see staunch Southlanders like Damian McKenzie try his hardest and not produce much, but he's a good lad.
How good, yeah. There's no such thing as a bad moustache.
That's right. Mate, I've been on your website. Where else can people find more and more information about this? Check you out, check Movember out. Where do people go? Yeah, mate,
the reality is Movember.com is the place to go. It's the place to go for participation and how to best do that, but it's also the place to go around our key messages, the type of behaviour we're really keen for men to take on. It's where the initiatives that we fund, information on those is housed, and we try to make it a one-stop shop for men's health. So that is the place to go, and hopefully through participating in the campaign and getting some of our comms and going to the website, etc., that empowers people to take some of that messaging and some of that behaviour and take it to their community and be an advocate for men's health and wherever they sit, whether it be at work, whether it be at sport or whatever, because that's, I think that's the way that, we're going to have the most success. I think it's working, and we just need to keep chipping away.
Lovely. And I'll be sure to put in a link to that in the show notes, as well as my own MySpace. Hopefully we can get a few funds heading your way. Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board. As I said, there's huge synergy in what you're doing and what I'm trying to achieve. What would you like to leave our audience with?
Mate, it's sort of probably one of the key messages I've been putting out there this month is, one, thank you for the support, because, over 11,000 people signed up for Movember New Zealand this year, and there's probably going to be 60 or 70,000 individual donations, which just shows the power of the collective. I think that's why Movember is successful, is just lots and lots of people just doing small things regularly all the time, and that's kind of, is awesome. But the last thing is probably, I would say, and I think you would agree with this, if you ask 20 guys, if you had a friend who was in a spot of bother, would you help them? I think all of those guys would say absolutely. But have you told your mate that? I think that's what I'm trying to say to people this campaign is, let them know that. Let them know that if he's in a spot of bother, no matter what it is, that you would be there for them. Because I think, it's got to be a two-way street. So if you'd be there for your mate, let him know. So that's one of the key messages we're trying to get out there this month, and sort of really encourage that mature conversation that's got a bit of depth to it.
Brilliant. I love it. And we'll finish it there, and I won't take up too much of your hugely busy schedule. And thank you so much for coming on board again. Cheers, mate.
No worries, Ryan. You're doing good things, mate. I appreciate the support this Movember from the podcast and from your moustache. Great work.
Cheers, buddy.